Good morning, everyone, and welcome to all of you to our debate on geo-blocking, the next steps. Today, we have gathered several experts to explore the territorial dimension of the digital single market, to look at how far we have come and to talk about the next steps. Creating a true digital single market by removing territorial barriers is a very complex task, and every new measure must be carefully assessed. Many stakeholders are involved, and today we will hear from some of them from different sectors. Today's debate is hosted by our steering committee member, MEP Róża Thun, connecting from Poland. Good morning, Róża. Róża is with the EPP group, and she is one of the most influential pro-European activists in Poland. She is a member of the Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection at the European Parliament. Today's event will unfold in three parts. An introductory part with views from Andrus Ansip MEP with the Renew Europe group from Estonia, and as you all know, former European Commissioner for the Digital Single Market. And we will hear views also from the European Commission with Prabhat Agarwal, Head of Unit at DG CNECT. Welcome back to our forum, Prabhat, after the DSA discussions last month. And then we will start with a second part of the debate, which will focus on the impact of geo-blocking on retail and on the circulation of goods. We will hear from the retail industry and the consumers with Léon Molenberg, Senior Policy Advisor at Ecommerce Europe, and Linn, Policy Officer at the Federation of German Consumer Organizations. Apologies if I don't pronounce the full German name of it. She will do that much better later. The third and last part will focus on the impact of geo-blocking on the creative industry sector. And we will hear views from the consumers as well as from some of the industry representatives, although we do know that it is a fairly diverse universe, as they will tell us. We will be joined by John Phelan, Director General at ICMP. Good morning, John, representing the music publishers, and by David Martin, Senior Legal Officer and Team Leader at BEUC, the European Consumer Organization. Last but not least, we will have a first respondent, Enrico Turrin, Deputy Director and Economist at the Federation of European Publishers. Thank you all very much for joining us. This is an outstanding panel, and we look forward to hearing your views and comments. Of course, after listening to all our speakers, there will be an exchange of views with our audience, which will take place in the Q&A session, while we're now in the stage session. We will guide you there later when the time comes. We are now ready to start. I would like to give the floor to Róża.
Hi, everybody. It's very nice to see you even in those conditions. And the issue is extremely important. Probably we become more and more aware of it during this pandemic, because we rely, many of us, on functioning in this internet sphere throughout the world, but especially in Europe. And every barrier not only irritates, but makes our life very difficult. We have been talking about geo-blocking since December, much longer. But the regulation was adopted on the 3rd of December 2018. And I noted a few points that I wanted to quote here just in order to remind, because it's already almost 2 years ago. So this regulation, as we remember, forbids discrimination against consumers based on its nationality or residence. And this includes, of course, the temporary location. It forbids this discrimination when buying, purchasing goods online. The Commission committed in its legal text that it will thoroughly assess the way in which the regulation has been implemented. We are almost 2 years after the regulation was voted. It will take account of the increasing expectations of the consumers, especially of those with no access to copyright protected services. It will also perform a substantive analysis of the feasibility and potential costs and benefits arising from any changes to the scope of the regulation, in particular with regard to the possible deletion of those exemptions we have discussed so thoroughly for a long time and that were very controversial to many of us. And these, I mean here the exemptions from geo-blocking rules, and namely music, games, and e-books. I don't come to audiovisual yet, but we should slowly take it to consideration. And this is the last point I want to mention. The Commission will also carefully, says the text, analyze whether in other sectors, such as services in the field of transport and audiovisual services, any remaining unjustified restrictions based on nationality, place of residence, or place of establishment should be eliminated. And this should have been done on the 23rd of March 2020. We are now in the end of October, so I'm extremely happy that we meet in such an distinguished panel, people from various fields, in order to discuss it, in order to discuss those issues with maximum of goodwill, because I am totally persuaded that, especially in those times, we are conscious how important it is to open, to help functioning the businesses, but to help building this united Europe of which we speak so much. And as long as it is divided in the virtual sphere, we will never have a Europe with real Europeans. And I hope that we will have a fascinating panel now in this very spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Róża, for your opening comments. And now over to Andrus Ansip MEP, Vice Chair of the IMCO Committee and former European Commissioner for the Digital Single Market.
Thank you, Maria. I have to start from the year 2015, when we put together digital single market strategy. Then we said also that we will abolish unjustified geo-blocking. And of course, we created some kind of scandal, because all the creators said that our copyright system is based on principle of territoriality, and how you can destroy the whole functioning, one functioning system. But this system didn't function well, because we didn't have portability of digital content at that time. You had access to digital content in one country, legal access, maybe even paid access to in one country to some kind of content, and when just crossing the border, you didn't get access to the same content anymore. So we launched portability proposal, and now we can say that this was really a real success story, because after abolishing of roaming surcharges, people, they wanted to get access to their digital content also when traveling in some other EU member states. And now nobody even remembers that it wasn't allowed just in the year 2015. So this is a success story. Then when talking about tangible goods, then I was pretty surprised that we have a huge problem in the European Union. According to our studies, 2% of those people who wanted to get access to some websites selling cross-border some goods and services, they just couldn't get access because their IP address was wrong. 2%, it's almost nothing, but 27% of those who got access to this to those websites, they couldn't register it because, once again, they were from some kind of wrong EU member states. And it's not about Central and Eastern European countries, but here in Belgium, we couldn't get access to websites in France, in Italy, in Luxembourg even, and so on. Well, 32% of those lucky people who got access to websites selling some goods and services cross-border, they faced with parcel delivery issues. They were not able to get their purchases. So I never thought that we had to deal with parcel delivery prices, but we launched a proposal and then we reached an agreement because in one EU member state, difference between domestic parcel delivery prices and cross-border parcel delivery prices was even 22 times. When then 26% of those people who didn't have any kind of issues with delivery couldn't pay. We have SEPA in the European Union, single European payments area, but they said, we will not accept your credit card in our country. So all together, just 36.6% of all those people who tried to buy some goods and services from another countries, they were able to conclude that their purchases successfully. So then, of course, we had discussions and we agreed that we will abolish unjustified geo-blocking, but this is only when we are talking about tangible goods and services bought online but consumed locally, like hotel business, car rental, concert tickets, and so on. Audiovisual content is not covered, as Rosa Thun said, with this solution. And more generally, it's not so black and white issue as portability issue really is. The main question is which law applies, seller's law or consumer's law. And I'm not so sure that this part of abolishing of unjustified geo-blocking was a real success story. It means that we didn't reach final destination yet. We have to continue our work. I would like to cordially thank everybody involved in this process, especially Rosa Thun, who was rapporteur in this case. Looking forward to have fruitful debates, but I'm so sorry I had to leave earlier because we have negotiations about the next MFF, and I had to take part also in those negotiations. Thank you and enjoy the debate.
Many thanks, Andrus, for your comments, for going back to 2015. And as you said, the final destination has not been reached yet, but what are the next steps? Over to Prabhat Agarwal with the European Commission.
Thank you very much for organizing this debate, and I'm also very happy that I'm able to be here with you, and this is an important topic. And I'm also very happy that I'm able to perhaps update you a little bit on the work that the European Commission has been doing, and some of the findings that we will hopefully be able to publish in a very short period of time. Of course, like many other sectors of our world and society, the COVID crisis has also affected our internal working, and some areas of our work were affected and slowed down, whereas others were accelerated. But this is the main explanation for the delay in the publication of the report. So I just want to start with that. But we are hopeful that it will be imminent, the publication of the report, and that we are able to update the Parliament and other stakeholders on what we have found. Maybe I can just briefly recap. I don't want to repeat the introductory words by Andrus Ansip and Róża Thun, who have, of course, been more than instrumental in the geo-blocking debate and in the creation of the internal market. So we fully share the overall objectives of creating better access to goods and also content cross borders in the European Union. And maybe I can just briefly outline the approach that we took to the review. So we sought feedback from member states and their authorities who were entrusted with enforcement of the regulation. We carried out a range of studies comparing the cross-border accessibility of websites and offers between the impact assessment we did in 2015 and also, again, taking a snapshot of the same accessibility in 2019. We carried a very detailed analysis of a possible extension, as we committed after the negotiations, as mentioned already by MEP Róża Thun. This included a detailed analysis of cross-border demand and cross-border availability for different content-related services, including audiovisual, e-books, music, and video games. And this analysis looked at static effects like prices, quantity, variety of different content types, and we complemented them where possible with dynamic effects, for example, in areas such as investment. Some other, given the short-term short period of time that was available, we also looked a little bit at the effect of some other sectors that are not covered, such as transport, financial, telecoms, and health. In those areas, there wasn't a huge amount of data available, partly because of the sector-specific regulations in some of these areas taking kind of precedence. And we also made a small effort to look a little bit at effects related to the COVID crisis. And this was mentioned right in the first sentence by MEP Róża Thun. Just to complement, we carried out some other activities as well. We repeated a Eurobarometer survey of consumer expectations and the experience of buying cross borders. That was already published a little bit earlier this year. We carried out an economic study of the impact or extension of copyright protected services. This is about to be published. Another mystery shopping survey, as I mentioned, and other surveys and technical reports. I don't want to list them all here, but so I want to just say that the report that we have prepared, we really did we tried to do a really thorough and complete job of the analysis. I mean, our preliminary findings were that the period of time that the geo-blocking regulation was in force has not been long enough to really really detect all its expected impact, even in the sectors that were already in scope of the geo-blocking regulation. Also partly because some member states had delays in implementing the oversight structures in their countries. Some member states delayed the appointment of the competent authorities for oversight, and the Commission was working very hard and also launched some procedures in order to make sure that consumers have adequate protections there. This has now been by and large resolved, but as a result, there was some delay even in the initial effects that were anticipated. The analysis that we carried out, and that will be in the report, is that the effects of a potential extension vary quite a bit depending on which kind of content we are talking about. And I think I don't want to anticipate too much the details of that content, and I think we would be better placed to have a discussion in the future on the basis of the actual report. But some of the key headline findings I just want to share with you in terms of kind of just cross-border demand. It is true, and this is also, I think, what the MEPs have mentioned in their opening remarks, that the number of internet users that actively seek access to content from another country has increased, doubled nearly, particularly amongst young people who seek access across borders. And according to our data, the most common reasons for trying to access such contents are lack of availability of such content in their own country, as well as the desire to have a wider choice of content. Now, it is also true that for normal goods, like Andrus Ansip mentioned already, that the number of Europeans trying to buy goods across border is also increasing, and in the large majority of cases, the purchase today can be completed. So unlike the situation that was maybe described in 2015, but there are still quite significant limitations, and some of these limitations relate to delivery, and some of them relate to the application of the existing rules. So this is just a very short snapshot to kick off the discussions, and I'm very happy to be here to kind of give you this little preview. And I look forward to a really more detailed discussion on the basis of a very comprehensive and complete work that we did over the last months, which unfortunately, and it's to our regret and to everyone's regret, was delayed by the force majeure of the coronavirus crisis. Maybe I just stop here and hand back to the moderator.
Many thanks, Prabhat, for these anticipations. I'm sure you will get some questions from the audience later during the Q&A session, but that will be on the Chatham House rule. Indeed, the geo-blocking is a hot potato and creates some anxiety as well for some stakeholders in some sectors. But let's focus now on the retail sector. I'd like to bring in Léon Molenberg with the Ecommerce Europe.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for being invited for this meeting. I represent Ecommerce Europe. We are the organization representing 25 national e-commerce organizations and more than 100,000 companies, web shops. So we are basically the interfaces, the online interfaces mentioned in Article 3 that provide mainly goods. So I basically talk about the provision of goods and not of the provision of services, as our members mostly serve goods and not services. So I will basically restrict with, I will make some remarks on the portability regulation, but I basically will talk about the geo-blocking regulation. What was the main effect? What happened when the regulation came into force in December 2018, nearly 2 years ago? Basically, web shops were reorganizing their territorial sales of goods and services, because for web shops it's extremely important that they have the delivery of goods, that they can manage it on the conditions they like to and they can handle. To give you an example, or to give you the main question, which was important for us as web shops, that we want to be part of let me say, the geo-blocking regulation and serving consumers also from areas we don't target. But what we didn't want and what we still don't want is an obligation to deliver everywhere in Europe. So it's extremely important for web shops to have the area organized on their own conditions where they are willing to deliver. And that's that's what happened. Web shops reorganized their web pages and their territorial sales of goods and services. They explicitly started informing on the different territorial areas they target. They explicitly formulate and informed on different conditions for the different areas, so that everybody could know, okay, if you're on this website, these are the conditions and these are the payment conditions. And what they explicitly did, because of questions of applicable law, and also because they simply were not able to deliver everywhere, limit explicitly their delivery to the areas they can handle. And this is what really was important for them. As I got the invitation for this meeting, there was a phrase that really triggered me, and that says that there is still a reluctance to deliver cross-border from web shops. And there's no reluctance, but for a lot of web shops, it's impossible to deliver further than the area they serve. To give you a simple example, my local grocery shop, who is delivering local products on a sustainable manner, is only willing to deliver, also because of delivery costs, and to keep them sustainable, only in a restricted area. So they are willing to serve everybody who is willing to pick up in this area, but they are not willing to serve people who want to have the goods delivered outside this area. But we managed to do it. We got, as a web shop, as serious businesses, we tried to care for non-discrimination, and the biggest challenge for us was redirecting. How do you get explicit consent for redirecting in times where people are consent fatigue, and where they really don't want to be bothered by all kinds of questions on consent. So we were questioning this opt-in explicit consent versus an opt-out. We think it would be more serving to consumers to have to let them give their consent via an opt-out and not via an opt-in. But in practice, I must be fair, we didn't get any reports from our members that this was a real problem. So I guess they managed in technically fitting the redirecting instrument, or better say the fact that they are not allowed to redirect the consumer without explicit consent. But there we see a little problem also, because it's not always clear which page the consumer wants to visit. And for instance, when a company has a general website and the consumer searches on the general website, normally they will be redirected to the country site, or to the national site of the country of residence, because we think we can serve them best in language and in specific issues of the local market. But then we don't know whether this is seen as a redirecting if we automatically direct them, because they didn't make a choice, to a national site. That's one problem. And the other problem is that a lot of consumers search for goods over search engines or over platforms, intermediary platforms. And what we see is that the search engines mostly are still nationally orientated. So they have a profile of the customer searching for a certain good. And what we see is that hardly ever consumers get a comparison or a price comparison between the several national sites of one company. For instance, there's no comparison between the price offered in Germany and the price offered in the Netherlands when both countries are targeted. So that's one of the problem. And but we never got any feedback from our members that in practice it would be a problem. We also had to adapt to new payment sorts because we had to allow everybody the same payment methods as we allowed the local customers. So this was a major technical issue, but in practice, I never got any comments from my from my members that they had major problems. What were we expecting from problems? Because in those days we didn't know what to come, and we had some issues where we expected problems, especially on applicable law. Which we are grateful that in the regulation there's a explicit rule saying that complying with the geo-blocking regulation will not imply automatically that you target consumers in their own country, so that the law of the consumer's country will also be applicable besides the law of the consumer. And we also expected problems on the competence of courts, especially because it's not the absolute competence, but in relative competence. So when, for instance, in Germany or in the Netherlands, a certain judge is absolute competent, the relative competence mostly is coupled on the place of residence of the consumer. But at geo-blocking, as the consumer is from outside the country, and there's no place of residence known in the country when he picks up in the country. So do we have to stick to other let me say ways of trying to assess which relative court is competent in these cases. We also expected problems on after sales services, because you can imagine that if a consumer is buying a good in another country than he is living in, it may be difficult to render to him the after-sales services in the same way we render them to local consumers. But again, we didn't get any reports from our members that it led to major problems. The same is on consumer rights, because we think the consumer rights will be applicable of the country of pickup, where the consumer picks up the goods, and that also withdrawal and free returns and so on were a thing we had to think about, because if you offer free return for your own customers in your own country, what does it mean for customers coming from outside the territorial area you target? Do they also have a free returns, because the cost of returns will be substantially higher when coming from further away. The same we had the same problems we expected on non-conformity, and especially on remedies for consumers, on repair, replacement, and damage compensation. Up till now, I didn't get any major reports from my members that there were problems, but we never had cases on it, so maybe it will become a problem because the geo-blocking regulation is only came into force only a short time. And then a short notice on portability of portable digital online services. As already mentioned, it's a major success, but it's only a success for paid services, and paid services paid with money. And we have a problem in that sense that in the new directive on the delivery of digital content, you also can pay with your data, with your personal data. And So there is a counter prestation for the consumer comparable with money, because data are an asset. So we think there should be a new, let me say, rethinking about portable digital online services that are so-called free, but are not free because they're paid for with data. Maybe they should come in the scope of paid services and not in the scope of unpaid services. That's one problem, and the other one is that we see a lot of profit for consumers, or a lot to gain, when we look to search engines, price comparison engines, and platforms. Because when we look to price comparison or search engines and platforms intermediating, they mostly have a profile of the consumer, knowing where the consumer is resident, and they mostly direct their activities or try to connect the consumer with web shops in his own country. And of course, a last one is enforcement. We didn't see much enforcement actions up till now, or better said, we didn't get them reported. So we think basically the the geo-blocking regulation came into force without causing too much problems for the merchants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Léon, for these clarifications and this overview of issues and challenges experienced by retailers. Let's now hear from the consumers, though, with Linn Selle, with the Federation of German Consumer Organizations. Over to you, Linn.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. So, as you can imagine, our aim from the German Consumer Organization more generally, in consumers should be able to buy as easily online in the single market than as they should. As already mentioned by Prabhat, why are cross-border purchases important? At the moment, of course, the COVID pandemic plays an important role. Online purchases are gaining more traction, also cross-border purchases. We see very clear indications in consumer preferences that consumers do want to shop online cross-border, both directly from web shops and also mediated via online platforms. And I also like to add here that if we look at the bigger market structure, so to say, or structure of where do EU citizens live, we nowadays have roughly 10 million EU citizens that do not live in their home country. Given the fact that this is the size of, you can see that this is quite a tangible number of people who live, so to say, abroad in the single market. So before the geo-blocking regulation came into force, consumer organizations often received a multitude of complaints regarding the well-known cases on leisure parks, on car rentals, holiday package travels. And maybe to remind you, but I think also Róża, Thun and Andrus Ansip made it quite clear that consumers legitimately expect that they can buy goods and services freely in the EU's internal market. And when this is refused, many fear that the EU internal market is still there mostly for businesses that have the freedom of establishment, create companies, subsidiaries elsewhere in the single market, but that consumers are dependent on traders accepting to sell and to deliver to their country. So this is why we supported quite strongly the geo-blocking regulation. Also given the fact that before it was coming into force, we saw quite a high number of web shops that applied different parts of geo-blocking, as Andrus Ansip already mentioned. And we also see that the geo-blocking regulation in that respect had an effect, that the Commission did this second round of a mystery shopping, showing that a couple of months after coming into force of the regulation, the numbers dropped from 63% of geo-blocking measures down to 10%. So there seemingly regulation is working, though there is still to do furthermore. What we praise, of course, is enshrining the principle of non-discrimination in the single market, the access of single market, and of course the end of rerouting practices and a non-discrimination of payment services. But when we now look at we take the outlook and look what is further needed, of course, consumers have more expectations towards a consumer-friendly digital single market than what the regulation actually can deliver. So maybe to give, first of all, what we still see, despite numbers going down of geo-blocking measures, that there is still a lack of enforcement and implementation by traders. The German Federal Network Agency, who in Germany is in charge of enforcing the regulation, showed that in the past year they received more than 100 complaints. Thankfully, all could be resolved amicably so far, but it's matters of concern. Apparently not all traders implemented the geo-blocking regulation yet. There are still complaints about rerouting, about consumers needing national mobile phone numbers, national bank accounts, or social security numbers. And also there have been reports that due to the regulation, traders with web shops in different countries suddenly changed their terms and conditions after coming into force of the geo-blocking regulation in order to prevent shipping goods in the whole of the EU, which they did apparently before the geo-blocking regulation. So there is still a matter of further implementation and also enforcement being important from our perspective. Also, a part of many complaints from the consumer side is, of course, the expectation of cross-border delivery, which was already mentioned. This is, of course, a very stringent consumer expectation in order to also fully open competition inside the single market. Like to see more movement. And of course, when we look at the Commission's review, it would be also very interesting for us to see how consumer prices have developed after coming into force of the regulation, because in 2015 or 16, there were estimations about lower prices and benefits of 2.4 billion euros per year. And it would be very interesting to us to know how this price structure changed due to the regulation. And of course, finally, the question of audiovisual services is also quite an important one for us, but I'm sure that David will talk more about this from the consumer perspective. So far, thank you.
Indeed, thank you very much, Linn, for your clarifications about the consumer experience and expectations. Let's now move to the audiovisual discussion, actually the creative industry discussion, which covers audiovisual, but we have here the representative from the music industry to start the debate with. So John Phelan with ICMP. John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Maria Rosa. And well, indeed, much of music today in Europe is indeed audiovisual also. Good morning, everyone. I did have a little weak signal for the audio on Linn's presentation. I do hope you can hear me okay. But may I start by just earnestly thanking our hosts today, the EIF, Ms. Rosa Thun and Mr. Andrus Ansip, for their warm welcome. ICMP is a very proud member of the European Internet Forum, and personally, I always find the events convivial, expert and educative. So I only convey how much I look forward to the next morning we can do all of this in person. Before summarizing our position and the rationale at the topic at hand, by way of introduction, my name is John Phelan, and ICMP is the global trade body for the music publishing industry. ICMP's members include the majors, as we call them within the industry, more than 1,000 indies, the vast majority of whom are SMEs, startups, or sole traders, and more than 54 national associations across 5 continents, and indeed in 25 of the EU 27 member states. Cumulatively, we represent more than 90% of the world's published music, from Billie Eilish to Brahms, from Bob Dylan to Dvorak, from Radiohead to Ravel. Some of our European companies are among the oldest in the world. Petrucci and Schott were established in the 1700s, but our companies are also among the most modern and digitized, with Warner, BMG, Universal, Sony, and all of our startup members driving technology such as AI, virtual reality, and live streaming. Among the 6 primary ways our industry licenses music to the European market are broadcast TV and film, radio, live performance, physical, that's CD and vinyl primarily, but of course, digital. I firmly believe that the European digital single market is one of the crowning gems of the European project. We in music appreciate this more than most. For 20 years ago, piracy and disruption saw more than 55% of global revenues wiped from our sector in less than a decade. In response, we digitized early and comprehensively. And today, 445 million EU consumers enjoy more than 67 million musical works, portable and cross-border, on more than 700 licensed digital services worldwide. Today, smart radios in cars, AI-driven speakers, indeed the device in every single one of our pockets enables access to the most obscure Sibelius symphonies and the latest hit you may have Shazammed off the radio this morning. However, Europe's digital single market remains something of a fragile construction. The reality is that even pre-COVID, the DSM was not yet a rewarding place. Digitizing music is investment, staff, and expertise heavy. It could not be further from the suggestion of just casual uploads. Revenue rates continue to be low, and much work remains to make digital viable for European business and creators. Therefore, crucial to achieving viability and central to today's debate are fair licensing in every member state, the principle of territoriality, and respect for copyright, after years of sustained challenges to each. Thankfully, recent EU policy has taken a leading role globally. As mentioned earlier by Mr. Ansip, the portability legislation is already a big step since the debate around this particular topic arose. Copyright, we must always remember, is not a dirty word, despite the deliberate dereliction by some. Simply put, it is the ink on the millions of creators and SMEs payslips across Europe. Copyright is also by definition exclusive. That does not mean that we want to deny people music. It does mean that our creative partners should have their work appropriately licensed from member state to member state. Let me explain. The reasons include rights. Creators must be entitled to a return for their work as, when, and where it is used in each member state. Pricing. Our digital distributors must be able to price vary from member state to member state, to the continuing advantage of all European consumers. For example, monthly subscriptions to Deezer are available currently at €4.99 per month in Romania, but €9.99 per month in Italy. No differentiation in service. Contracts. For example, our companies need to be able to bundle music with telcos in various member states so that consumers can have access via their mobile deals. Piracy, tackling what continues to be a persistent scourge on the creative sectors. If prices rise in those member states with lower median disposable incomes, studies consistently show so does piracy. Competition. Any conflation of rights or rising access prices jeopardizes Europe's competitiveness on the world stage and in the internal market, industry's investment, which is so vital to continued creative diversity. Such practices, I may suggest, are important for many creative sectors, far beyond music also. We're very grateful to each of the institutions for the opportunities to extensively input on the geo-blocking regulation in recent years, including the recent Article 9 review process on music, software, and books, as mentioned by Prabhat earlier, and we concur with the regulation's core concluded purpose, tackling unjustified discrimination of goods and services. The reasons above outline why we also agree with the exclusion of digital music and indeed copyright-protected works from the legislative scope, and we urged caution on the inherent consequences of overextension. To paraphrase a former Irish Prime Minister, that's okay in practice, but can it work in theory? The post-COVID-19 era will require prudent, evidence-based EU policy making more than ever before. In France today, government projections of creative sector losses exceed €22 billion for this year. The German government predicts losses between 4 and 6 billion for music and 30 billion for the broader creative sector. We in music are proud to contribute to the European culture and commerce with all of our colleague creative industries in film, TV, books, photography, journalism, etc. Working together, our investment generated more than 500 billion of Europe's GDP last year and employed more than 15 million people. The digital single market is precious, but it's delicate. We have to shore up its foundations, not roof its potential. So to conclude, all that we in music ask, and I believe I'm very much on terra firma in suggesting that all of we in the creative sectors ask, is when considering next steps, let's ensure to thoroughly analyze where, how, and if that next step should fall. Thanks for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussion to come. I hope that's within time.
Many thanks, John, for describing the challenges for the sector and for reminding us of the digital revolution that was already started time ago for the music sector. And we will be continuing this discussion, of course, also later during the Q&A session, I'm sure. I would like now to bring in the view of the consumer organization with David Martin with BEUC.
Good morning. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to apologize in advance because my kids are at home, they're on holiday, and I hear them next door. I hope they won't storm into this room, but apologize if they do in the end. I also wanted to start with a personal comment, first of all, because we heard the words goodwill and anxiety, and also John was kind of welcoming the debate, which I think is good. I just wanted to say that from my perspective, some of the pressure that has been put on the organizers of this event from certain stakeholders has been a bit out of place and excessive. So I really hope that we can have an open and honest discussion, and so really welcome that in the end we are having this discussion, because in our perspective from the consumers, geo-blocking is a discriminatory practice that should have no place in a digital single market. So a lot has been achieved so far. And with the geo-blocking in e-commerce, although there's still things to iron out, as we see, a lot has been achieved as well on portability, but there's still this piece of the puzzle of this digital single market that is still missing, and it's a big piece in our opinion. And from our perspective, the main issues really, we can talk about different types of content, and we agree not all content is the same. Films, books, music, all they are different, have their specificities. But I really wanted to focus on the audiovisual services, because from our perspective, this is where main focus should be right now, and where consumers are facing most problems. Let's say it's still the end. I mean, we're at the end of 2020, and consumers are still being blocked when they try to access services cross borders, audiovisual services cross borders. We think that this is limiting consumer choice. This is generating frustration among consumers. This is incentivizing piracy, and this is restricting competition. So we think that the industry here is holding on to a model that is really going against a single. The only reasoning we see at the end is like, this is done because it's the best for business. Let's say it's a model that is designed to maximize the profits. And I have just a recent example from one of our members, the Norwegian Consumer Council, who are telling us that to watch the Premier League in their country, the rights have been exclusively granted to one broadcaster. That Premier League is very popular in their country, so a lot of consumers want to watch the Premier League, and therefore have to subscribe. The premium package that they have to be able to watch the Premier League is having a 40% increase in the price, so it's going something from 45 euros to 63 or something like that, which means that for a year the consumer would have to spend around 750 euros to watch the Premier League. They have no legal alternative, no choice, there's no competition. So if they want to watch the Premier League, it's either that or turning to illegal offers, let's say. And we think that things would be different and would be better if those consumers could benefit from a real single market. So if they could vote with their feet and perhaps look elsewhere and see if there are other offers that are better tailored to their needs. Now, does this mean that all consumers will go elsewhere? Probably the answer to that question is no, because there are different things. It's not only about the content. You have bundles that you have to give into account. You have local content and adaptations which consumers still value. So this still will play an important role. Does this mean that the whole model will fall apart? We think that the answer to that question should be no as well, because it doesn't mean that you won't be able to kind of allocate licenses territorially. I mean, we are not against territorial licensing. What we are advocating for is for, let's say, allow those consumers that want to go elsewhere, so these so-called passive sales, to be enabled. The content can still be licensed territorially, but this absolute exclusive territoriality, we think that it's a problem. And it's not only BEUC that thinks that it's a problem. We have cases ongoing in the European Court of Justice about these issues too. So we also think that the loss of subscriptions in one place probably at least partly would be compensated by the passive sales in other places. But the question for us is twofold. First of all, there's a lot of discussion about demand. Is there enough demand, or are we creating a problem that is not there? There were indications already back in 2016. The Federation of German Consumers did a survey that said that 70% of the consumers they polled were actually interested in accessing foreign audiovisual services. There was also the Commission survey in 2015. 1 out of 2 Europeans interested in watching content from another member state. We have recent data that Prabhat was mentioning. So the demand is growing. So, but there's the kind of the ultimate question that we have to ask ourselves from our perspective is, what do we want to achieve here? So I think for us, the goal really is to create a real digital single market that incentivizes access to culture, that incentivizes competition, and that increases consumer welfare and allows consumer to take all the benefits that a single market can really deliver. So the single market shouldn't only be about businesses. And we think that this is a worthy objective pursuing, and that the single market has been, let's say, held back for too long on this point. So we took the first steps already. We see the European Court of Justice taking the same steps in these directions. So our real question now is like, what are we waiting for, I would say. And I will leave it here and looking forward to your questions.
Many thanks, David. So the message was clear. There's still a big piece of the digital single market missing. The expectations of the consumers are clear. However, as John said, there's copyright is not a dirty word. There's a very valuable meaning behind copyright for the sector. But as David said, not all content is the same. So let's look into this a little bit further. I'd like to bring in the point of view of the book publishers with Enrico Turrin.
Thank you very much, Maria Rosa. Thanks, everyone. Ms. Thun, Mr. Ansip, all the distinguished guests. I'm glad to be here and to have the opportunity to bring in the point of view of the book industry in Europe. I represent the Federation of European Publishers, which is an umbrella organization representing 29 national associations of publishers of books, learned journals, and educational materials from all over Europe. We also represent around 90% of the book market in Europe, with members in almost every member state, and also a few other countries. book publishing, largest cultural industry in Europe, is an asset for Europe and an area in which Europe is a global leader. So it's something that you should have at its heart, just as, of course, all the cultural and creative industries. And I am very glad to be able to save a couple of minutes from my presentation, because I can subscribe to all of the 100% to all of the principles that Johnny outlined, so I don't need to get into that. But bear in mind that they apply also to us. So I'm very glad that Johnny laid them out so clearly and poignantly. Coming to the topic at hand, I'd like first of all to state that in the book sector, we have no interest or intention to discriminate our readers. Our goal is to reach as many people as possible with our books, both in print and digital, however the readers want to access their books. The only thing is that, like with every other endeavor, this has to be done in a way that is the sustainable, viable, and pretty much that makes sense for everyone involved. Now, looking at the situation for the ebook sector in particular, we see that in most cases, ebooks will actually be really available in most or all territories to consumers, and our readers will be able to find an ebook for sale from some source, one or another, maybe not in all outlets in all countries, but they will be able to find the ebooks they want to read. Also, we don't really apply price differentiation. That's not much in our interest, although it can also make sense to adapt your offer to the cost of life in the countries that you are reaching to. And again, evidence also shows that there isn't a problem of accessibility across borders, so that the target for any regulation would be really very, very narrow, not least, and it has to be borne in mind, because in our sector, demand is driven mainly by language considerations, so that cross-border demand for ebooks is really very limited and often insignificant outside of homogeneous linguistic areas. And within homogeneous linguistic areas, there is even less of an issue with geo-blocking that across language areas. On the other hand, it is very important to point out that, in our sector for sure, I'm sure in others as well, the location of a customer does matter to a vendor, and it matters in a way that is completely independent from whether a sale is active or passive. It matters for technical reasons, from the need to display a correct price, be it because different VAT rates apply, or you might have book price regulations that apply. It matters for economic reasons because of the cost of payment systems that varies from country to country and depends, for example, the more countries you include among the credit cards you accept, the more costly it becomes for you to have a payment system online in place, and that can vary really a lot. The cost of software to handle in different sales conditions, the cost of handling the need to display correct pricing because of, again, for example, of taxation. And it matters for legal reasons. From consumer legislation to the fact that you might be exposed to defamation causes more in one country than another. There might be different provisions regarding child protection, or you might even simply have a book that is considered for children in one country and not in another. So you need at least a level of differentiation of your offer. So all of this together means that it is not at all cost neutral to sell into more territories. And in a few cases, but even though if there are a few, you still need to take them into account, it might even not be advisable from a legal point of view to allow the sale of certain titles to certain territories. So it stands to reason that publishers and booksellers, in some cases, would prefer to limit sales to the territories where it actually makes sense to sell legally and economically. So it's not a matter of discriminating, it's not a matter of segmenting, it's not a matter of keeping anyone out, it's a matter of retaining the possibility to do this fine-tuning of your offer in order to maintain it viable, sustainable, and in some cases, simply reasonable. A blanket obligation to avoid restrictions would most likely achieve the opposite of the desired effect, because it would force a number of small operators, and there are a lot of very small operators in the field, to withdraw from online sales altogether and reinforce the already dominant position of a few large players, which I'm sure is not an objective that anyone here would like to achieve. But we think that a lot of mitigating measures could be put in place to help traders overcome these difficulties, but these, if there's a chance to have them, should come in any case before a ban on geo-blocking is introduced, and still they might not address all issues. So we think that in the current situation, to put it really simply, an indiscriminate ban on geo-blocking in the ebook sector would generate costs much higher than the benefits, and definitely wouldn't stand a proportionality test. Not least because, and the Eurobarometer, the latest Eurobarometer confirmed it, the demand across borders for ebooks, especially outside of homogeneous language areas, is extremely low, and the proportion of people who encounter problems within the already low proportion of those interested is even lower, so that we are looking at probably less than 1% of the population, or actually less than 0.5% of the population that actually has an issue with accessing books across border. If I might, just a couple of words on the physical domain, which anyways is very relevant for us as well. You know, books are among the goods that people mostly buy online. More than 1/3 of people who buy anything online love to buy books online, and we've seen it even more with the pandemic. So two issues should really be addressed, also to facilitate life for both readers and sellers of books who want to buy physical books online. One is, indeed, it's been mentioned by Mr. Ansip, the issue of delivery, the cost of delivery, which can be to some extent insane across borders. Books, cultural goods in general, should always be treated the best possible way and should have maximum ease of circulating, also by keeping the cost of delivery at the lowest possible level. And again, the cost of allowing credit card payments, because the fact that many people might be blocked because of their credit card also depends on this. This also should be kept at a minimum in order to allow as many traders as possible to have a viable business online. So with this, I think I've used up my time, but I'm glad to keep talking in the Q&A session. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Enrico, for this overview on the many issues that geo-blocking ban would generate on European publishers. So let's continue the discussion and bring in our audience as well. Let's all move now to the Q&A session, where we can continue the conversation also with questions from participants. Participants only have to click on the Q&A session tab or on the link that was shared in the chat box. When you're there, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, just click on Ask to share your audio and video. And I will see your requests and I will bring you on stage with the panel and for you to ask your question or make a comment. So I'll see you there For all the speakers, please immediately ask to share your audio and video so you can be immediately visible to the audience again. See you there.